So how do you advise marketers to rethink measurement strategies to keep up with not only an omni-channel world where conversions happen both online and in store, but also like an omni-channel world where you're marketing online and in store?
But the thing that I've seen that seems to work the best is where companies do a couple of things. So one, they accept that there's going to be uncertainty. They're not going to have perfection. They just sort of embrace that. And I think that that is actually a really good first step because it gets everyone starting from a healthy place. Exactly. And then the next thing that they do is they really sort of think about operating their marketing program in a way so that planning, budgeting, experimentation, and measurement all live on the same plane and happen together.
Hi, and welcome to Growth Talks, where we dive deep into the world of growth and marketing with industry leaders. I'm Krystina Rubino, the General Manager of Offline at Right Side Up, and your host. Today, I'm joined by Michael Kaminsky, a co-founder and co-CEO of Recast, a startup that is building the most rigorous media mix modeling platform in the world. Michael was trained as a statistician and econometrician and has spent his career building software to help people make better decisions. At Recast, Michael's helping brands take a holistic, data-driven approach to evaluating marketing performance across online, offline, and every stage of the funnel. He's collaborated with high-growth companies like Harry's, Mockingbird, Away, and Rocket Money. And with that, I'm excited to get into it with him. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Krystina. I'm excited to be here.
Sweet. So let's get right into questions. You've been way into data throughout your career. Right before you started Recast, you were in-house at Harry's Razors. Were you there to build the analytics infrastructure from the start? Were you refining prior processes that you inherited and were like, I want to do this differently? What was your journey like there?
Yeah, so a little bit of all of the above. I was the first dedicated analytics hire on the team, but I will say that Harry's it's one of the most fully analytical teams that I have ever worked with. It's founded by a bunch of ex-consultants, very deep bench of ex-consultants. A lot of their marketing team was actually ex-consultants, so they were very deeply analytical people, which is a wonderful environment for me because I wanted to build tools that other people could use to do their own analyses and do it in a smart way. And I had an amazingly receptive audience there. So a lot of the work that I was doing, especially when I was getting started, was trying to learn, like, how do you think about measuring this? What is the right way to think about the business, and then building the tools to help them do that in better and more efficient ways, using my background in econometrics and causal inference to really make sure that we're thinking about these questions appropriately and then putting the data into the hands of the people that need to make the decisions.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, especially because, well, we'll get into really wonderful, comprehensive attribution methodologies like last click a little bit later. But I'm always curious as to what makes people strike out on their own and be like, actually, I think this is a broader problem. I want to create a company that helps solve it. Was there like a moment or an indicator when you were like, oh, this is a broader problem and there's a need for a company like Recast? Because there are obviously other media mix modeling platforms out there. There's a million attribution partners. What was like the point where you were like, no, I want to do something?
Well, I think like many entrepreneurs, I only embarked on this journey because I thought it was going to be a lot easier than it actually turned out to be. I severely underestimated the amount of work that was going to be involved. But I think, over the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a real rise in sort of two different fields that I think are really interesting. One is causal inference. So this is a thing that I care deeply about, but it's sort of thinking really hard about how we can use statistics and data to learn true things about the world. And the salience of causal inference as a field has grown a lot as we've seen things like the replication crisis in academia, where it turns out that a bunch of sort of very famous studies and papers, some of which you have probably seen in like headlines, turned out to just be like false results, right? They weren't actually ever real. And so it caused a lot of people in the scientific community to start thinking a lot harder about, okay, where did we go wrong? And what are the better methods for improving that and for making sure that the things that we think we're learning from data are actually real? And so there's been a lot of literature and a lot of discussion about that. And I've always found that really fascinating and really personally interesting to me. And then secondly, there's been a lot of technological innovations, not generative AI, although that's very interesting as well, but around sort of certain types of statistical modeling that have allowed for the building and estimation of much more complex models than what was possible 15, 20 years ago. And those two things combined made it seem like, okay, now is a really interesting time to try to reapproach the problem of media mix modeling from the ground up, taking all of these lessons and new technologies that have been developed really recently and seeing if we can apply them to this problem and really have any breakthroughs. And so it was really those things plus obvious market demand. Like for many, many businesses, marketing is their largest line item. And so if you can make that even a little bit more efficient, it results in huge amounts of dollars of value. And so it feels like a problem worth tackling just because it can be so make or break for so many businesses in terms of their profitability.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And, to your point about there being other opportunities that have evolved in the last 15 to 20 years besides traditional attribution methodologies, it's incredible to me that in the year of Our Lady Taylor Swift 2025, many companies still rely on last click attribution despite its limitations in measuring many things accurately, not least of all top of funnel impact. What are some of the biggest blind spots, in your words, that this approach creates, and why and how should marketers rethink attribution to get a more holistic view of their efforts?
Well, this is the thing that I think is really tricky. So taking a step back, I'm a big critic of last touch attribution, and I will get into some of those criticisms. But I do want to say that for lots of businesses, last touch attribution is fine and it makes sense. My girlfriend runs a translation agency and she advertises on Google. It's the only place that she advertises. For her, last touch attribution, it works great. Like it's perfect. Yeah. And there are
your mix is paid search.
The mix is paid search, so it's pretty easy to measure. But even at one or two levels above that, if you're only advertising in one or two digital channels, you have a small, medium-sized business, last touch attribution works. You don't need anything other than that, and you can feel it. These business, they spend money on Facebook, they see their bank account going up. Like the connection there is actually pretty tight. The problem comes when, those businesses graduate then to being like higher, mid-market, mid-sized, large businesses. Yeah. And all of a sudden, this tool that worked really well when they were smaller no longer works well. And so that's a thing that I think it's important to keep in mind. Like this is not one size fits all advice. And you really have to think about where on that journey you are as to what type of measurement approach is going to make the most sense. So that being said, for these brands that have sort of gotten to that next stage, still on last touch attribution, I think, we're all, at least the people who are listening to this podcast are probably very familiar with these limitations. But touch-based attribution, by definition, touch-based attribution is biased towards the most bottom of funnel digital channels, the ones that have clicks that are observable, and the ones that are closest to the point of purchase. It's almost by definition in the name of last touch attribution that is what you are going to be biased towards. Yeah. And again, if your media mix is only paid search and Facebook or Meta, maybe that's fine. But as the media mix expands and you're doing more mid-funnel, top-of-funnel advertising, that measurement method is just going to be inherently biased.
Yeah.
And I think the place where most organizations get themselves into trouble is that the marketing team sort of understands this, but unfortunately they've trained their executive and finance team to look at the last touch reporting tool and use that as a source of truth. And now all of a sudden they have to walk a bunch of things back and everyone is getting confused. And that is really a bad place to be.
Yeah. To me, listen, perception is reality, right? If people there's a reason that Meta is so prevalent in terms of its prevalence in the media mix, right? It's the easiest platform to spin up, I would argue, frankly. I actually think it's easier to spin up than Google in some ways in terms of optimization. I can argue it either way. I've found that the more honest I am with clients, prospects, team members, partners, vendors, whatever, I've found that is where my success comes from, right? Having those honest conversations and telling people hey, actually, you're not ready for offline media yet. You're not ready for podcast. You're not ready for YouTube endorsement. You're not ready for streaming audio. Why? Oh, well, these are the challenges that you're going to run into in your media mix. Also, Have you ever like conversion rate optimized your landing page? No? Oh, cool. Yeah, don't do it on this channel. But I think there's a tendency for marketers to want to add complexity to the mix, especially when you might have had like experience at a more scaled startup. Like maybe you're going from like something that's mid-market, something that's scaled, something that's like Series C, and you're going to an earlier stage company. Like, is there an inflection point at which you think, wow, if you haven't hit that yet, we shouldn't even be talking? Like, does that come up in your conversations with prospective clients? And,
Yeah, it comes up a ton. And I mean, I think there's a lot of factors here. I think if we're focusing on the measurement side, which is my business, marketing, I think the tough thing for a lot of people is that just marketing is really hard. And there's no getting around that. And everyone wants a magic bullet. And so everyone's like, oh, if only I have this technology or this thing, then I will be able to do, all of my hopes and dreams will come true. And if it says AI or like advanced statistics, then it's like people are like, yes, finally, it's going to solve all of those problems. And so there's a lot, there's just, and I feel for them, right? Because marketers face an impossibly hard problem. It's just a really, really hard environment to work in for a lot of different reasons. And so I understand that inclination and that desire. But the truth of it is, and this is, again, the conversation that I have a lot, is that adding this additional complexity, it's not a silver bullet. It's not a panacea. It brings a lot of problems. And so as you are moving up the complexity stack in terms of measurement method, or even, different marketing channels, right? There's a lot of parallels here. You really need to make sure that it's actually going to be worth it, because adding additional complexity to your measurement stack brings a lot of problems. It brings more questions from executives. It brings more scrutiny because you're investing more into it. And really, it's mostly about you have to be ready for that. And so brands that are spending, a couple $1 million a year on a couple of digital channels, it's like something like a media mix model is not going to be that helpful for you. Like, we can run the model, you'll get results, but you're just not at the scale where it's going to create that much value that makes the juice worth the squeeze for the cost and the distraction and all of the other things that are going to come along with it. Businesses face trade-offs. And I think for most of those businesses, their time and their energy is going to be better spent thinking about pricing differently, or packaging, bundling their products differently, or reworking their messaging. All of those things are for those smaller businesses that aren't at, huge scale yet. That's just a better place to invest your time, because that's what's going to unlock the ability to get to the next level of scale.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think there's it's like you're almost looking to borrow the problems of the future at that point. Like, hopefully if you have product market fit, you have a great site, you have a great offering, your funnel's good, if all things are true, and your TAM is big enough and all of your business metrics are sound, like, you're going to scale to a point where you will hit these challenges. But until it makes sense from a media investment perspective, my advice to people is usually like, spend more on media. Literally put as much money into working dollars as possible, because any kind of attribution, media mix modeling, measurement, et cetera, solution, it's an added cost.
And again, the costs often aren't majority in like dollars paid to a vendor. It's often just like internal communication costs and explanations, and
it's not just the hard cost spent to a partner. It's literally like you're signing yourself up for conversations with your CFO, probably with your CEO, depending on the scale of the company. And I think that, like, with brands, especially when it comes to running campaigns across multimedia, tracking the full customer journey has probably never been more complex. We say that every year, but it also becomes more and more complex every year, right? Like, if you're, running meta and paid search, that's great. But if you're also running like television, traditional broadcast radio, and direct mail, and then you're throwing podcasts in the mix, like, how can marketers bridge the gap between offline and online data to measure true ROI? And what are some of the common missteps that you see across your business to where you're like, could you not do that? Your life would be so much easier if you just did X. I'll cede with you. My favorite is scaling multiple channels at the exact same time, fresh to the media mix. Let's just go for peak chaos, peak pain. Like, I have to, is that one of them?
That is a good example. I was going to say, like, that's a really good example of a thing that adds a lot of complexity. I think, in this world, I think that a lot of companies go wrong by, honestly, and like, this is going to sound maybe crazy from someone who is like a data scientist professionally. I've always been in the data, but expecting too much of data. There are questions that you cannot answer with data, and you sort of really need to deeply accept that. And like, we run marketing, I sort of run the marketing team at Recast, and we think a lot about what are the right ways to measure. And there's just a lot of things that we can't measure. We know we aren't going to be able to measure. Maybe we could get more signal, but it would be a lot of work. It's just like, we're just going to throw that stuff out. We're going to look at directional signals. Does it seem like it's working? And then we're going to use that to optimize until we get to that next scale where maybe some other measurement solution makes sense. And I think a lot of brands, they would do better by adopting that thinking. People are like, oh, we need to be data driven, which means every single decision we make needs to be based on data. And I actually think that that's totally wrong. A lot of decisions you can and should make should be based on strategy and your feel for the market and other things that aren't necessarily based solely on data. And if you build this culture where like everything has to be based on data, then you end up optimizing towards the things that are easy to measure instead of the things that are actually best for your business. And so that is actually like a thing that I wish more companies really embraced, is like, we're going to have some uncertainty here. We're going to take this big bet because we believe in it. We think that we're going to be able to like roughly measure, like, did it work? Is it bigger than a bread box? And that's sometimes the best that you can do. And that's totally reasonable. And so I would push more companies to really be thoughtful about what decisions do we absolutely need data for, and what decisions can we just make with gut feel anyway. And so that is a thing that I think more marketing teams need to be like honest with themselves and with their executive team about being like, look, we're not going to be able to measure this. We're going to make a calculated bet with some small part of the budget, and that's going to be totally reasonable.
Yeah, yes, 1,000,000% yes. Because the other problem that you run into when you get too data centric as an organization is that you start introducing this tendency to make data fit the story you want to tell, as opposed to listening to the data. And then the other thing is mistaking signal for noise, or mistaking noise for signal. Like, that is, I mean, actually, yeah, you can go either direction. We've all seen it happen, but it's like, that's where I just get into, I'm like, oh, you're setting yourself up for like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's just not, it's not an ideal situation, especially like, one of the interesting challenges to me is the brands who have expanded from being purely D2C, like pure play online, they're selling a good or a service and they're selling it only direct to consumer, then getting into both like digital, like marketplace retail, but physical retail, like your Caspers, your Warby Parkers, your Harrys. When you expand into the physical realm, especially, traditional attribution models start to break down. And that also I've always viewed as an inflection point for marketers to think, okay, I've got to rethink my marketing strategy, obviously, but I also have to rethink my measurement strategy. So how do you advise marketers to rethink measurement strategies to keep up with not only an omni-channel world where conversions happen both online and in store, but also like an omni-channel world where you're marketing online and in store?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. And then, again, this is another place where I don't think there's an easy answer, but the thing that I've seen that seems to work the best is where companies do a couple of things. So one, they accept that there's going to be uncertainty. They're not going to have perfection. They just sort of embrace that. And I think that that is actually a really good first step because it gets everyone starting from a healthy place. Exactly. And then the next thing that they do is they really sort of think about operating their marketing program in a way so that planning, budgeting, experimentation, and measurement all live on the same plane and happen together. And so what are some examples of the way that this might work? okay, we have a hypothesis, right? Thinking scientific method here, that running this TV campaign, will have long-term effects on our brand, which we don't think we'll be able to measure, but should at least drive a 1x ROI in in-store purchases. So we're going to do a big push for 2 months. We're going to do a before and after comparison. So look at, before we launch the campaign and after the campaign. And as long as we see that revenue goes up by at least X, then we're going to feel like, okay, we got to a good spot. And then, so they think about, okay, we're going to run the campaign. We're also going to do the measurement. Here's how we're going to evaluate it. We know that there's going to be effects that we can't measure. We're going to be okay with that. We're going to set the threshold that takes into account that strategy. And then we're going to operate it, and they'll do it and they'll run, and maybe it'll pass or maybe it won't. And they'll use that to decide what they're going to do 3 months from then. That, I think, is a really smart way to think about operating these campaigns, where everything comes together, where there's the hypothesis, there's the marketing that you're actually doing, there's some way of evaluating that isn't sort of over-promising on what's possible. And that comes together, and that feels really nice. And then you can think about repeating that with different channels. Other channels are easier to test in more structured ways, but they bring that all together. So it's not like, oh, there's an analytics team that's over there that's sort of looking over the marketing team's shoulder. It's more like, we're going to do this all together so that we're continuously optimizing the business, and the measurement and the media, it's all happening jointly.
We always do a little game in the middle of our episodes.
Okay.
It's not scientific at all. We call it the A/B test, and but it's the least scientific A/B test that hopefully any marketer will ever run. But I'm going to ask you some work-related questions and some fun questions, and very scientifically, you just have to pick one.
Okay.
And you can substantiate your answer or not. I'll give you a layup first. Mac or PC?
Mac.
It's funny because I always assume data people are going to say PC, but I also switched to Mac a long time ago.
I've been on a Mac for 10 years, so I'm deep in it now.
I get it. Tacos or burgers?
This one is so hard. Burgers.
Yeah.
I love a good cheeseburger. It's my comfort food, honestly. A cheeseburger and a chocolate milkshake is if I'm having a bad day, that's what I go for.
I love an eat your feelings moment, in either direction. And actually, we're having burgers for dinner tonight, so I just got extra excited for them. So it's funny because with these, I'm always there's no right or wrong answer. And with that question, there really is no right or wrong answer. But sometimes when we ask them, I'm there's a right answer to that one. Slack or email?
I hate them both so much. I don't know which one to choose.
Ooh, that's a good answer too.
Yeah, I'll go with email, I guess.
Oh, that's okay.
Slack's down today, so I'm having especially negative feelings.
I literally was looking at that question as I was coming up, and I was like, this is the day that we are recording. Slack is down across the world, and it's chaos. I was talking with somebody earlier, and we were like, this is when everybody used to be at a physical office, the Wi-Fi would go down.
Oh, yeah.
And bro, nothing got done. And so I'm I don't know, I've been hugely productive today. But then on the flip side of it, it just feels weird. I don't know. It just feels I'm disconnected from everything. So yeah, that's probably a note of my reliance on Slack, which is really unhealthy. Road trip or staycation?
Staycation. Easy.
I love a staycation too.
I love a staycation.
Oh, I'm loving this. I'm we have so much in common that I didn't know about. Paid media or organic?
I mean, organic. Obviously. If you can build a business without ever spending $1 on paid media, you are in a much better position.
See, that's where we diverge, because I love a repeatable experiment, and paid media is nothing if not repeatable and scalable. You can impact organic, but the time frame is not up to you.
That is true. That is true.
But yeah, I mean, hell, who wouldn't want a nice little, remember when
I sometimes talk to businesses that are huge that you've heard of, and I'm how much do you spend on paid media? And they're over the entire lifetime of the business, they spent $3 million. And I'm that is amazing. You have hundreds of millions of customers and you've never spent money on paid media. That's a miracle. It's a business miracle. When
I tell people, we are a marketing consultancy, we're a platform, right? And people are always well, how did you grow your business? It's literally 95% word of mouth. And people are just wait, what? Like, you're one of the largest growth marketing consultancies in the country. I'm like, yeah, we do good work. Like, it is wild. Like, it's absolutely wild. So it's, yeah. Hey, if you have product market fit, it's a good thing.
If you have product market fit.
Yeah. Digital detox or always connected?
Always connected.
I know, me too.
My girlfriend was always yelling at me to like leave my phone somewhere. And I'm like, I will not do it. I refuse to leave my phone at home while we go out. I just cannot be.
No.
I cannot.
Wait, leave your phone. What? No. What? Like it's 1880? Like
exactly.
No. We're not leaving our phone at home. I would literally the entire time be like where
that is why I can't do it. It's because I'm like, oh my God.
Cell phone, wallet, keys. It is the way. Like, yeah, I'd be leaving a restaurant and being like, oh my God, crap, like I did it. Okay. Online or offline marketing?
Oh man, there's like so little barrier between them today.
It's true.
We do only online marketing. So I'll say online marketing because that is what I do.
It's funny because my background is multi-channel, omni-channel, digital, like communications planning. And people are always surprised when I'm like, yeah, dude, if I was starting a business tomorrow, I wouldn't do offline marketing for at least a year. Like, they're just like, really? I'm like, yeah, even with everything you know, even with knowing exactly which podcast perform. But I'm like, yeah, dude, like, AdWords is so scaled for a reason.
It's so good. AdWords is so good.
It's so damn good.
It's like, so good.
My deepest tea prior to getting more into offline marketing about 10 years ago was paid search. And like, dude, that would be my first, second, and third dollar. Okay, a couple of fun ones, and then we'll get back to business. Early bird or night owl?
I'm an early bird.
Nice. Concert or movie night?
Ooh. Yeah, it definitely like 5 years ago would have absolutely been concert, but I'm old now, so now it's definitely movie night.
Okay, last. Would you rather be able to see the future or read minds?
See the future. Reading minds seems like it would be a terrible experience.
Oh, yeah. Actually, what was that movie? It's like, I don't know. He winds up driving himself crazy. And
that's what would happen to me. Like, I'm too neurotic as it is. Like, getting people's judgments wired straight into my brain is like, would not be healthy for me.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm hardest same. Like, I'd want to be able to like turn it on and off at like a drop of a hat and like mostly off.
I guess, yeah. If you can turn it on and off, then it's maybe a little. I was imagining like walking down the street and everyone's like inner voice was in my head. And I'm like, that sounds like a nightmare.
All right. So we're going to get back into it from our little detour into our A/B test. So I just really want to talk about measurement methodology and like why some of this is like what's old is new again, because MMM is not new, right? It's an approach that's been around for decades, but it's traditionally been on the slower side. It's been expensive. It's a little more difficult to adapt to like modern marketing environments. So can you just break down like TLDR, how your work at Recast and team's work at Recast is making it more accessible and like more relevant for today's marketers?
So I think we've always believed that the idea of a media mix model is a good idea, fundamentally sound. Like, let's look at the historical patterns of data and see if we can draw connections between changes in marketing activity on one side and changes in the business KPI on the other. Like that makes sense. But I think the way that it's been done historically has been, as you noted, sort of very slow, very labor intensive. And what that means practically is that it ends up not being actionable, not like testable or checkable. And you end up having to just take a lot of things on faith. And I think that doesn't match the way that modern marketers work because of the rapid pace at which marketing channels change, the dynamics of the different channels change. And so marketers need to be much more responsive than that. And it also, marketers today want to be able to test and learn. And so they need something that supports that. And so what we've been building at Recast is a technology platform that enables that has the nice features of a media mix model, which is to say, top-down econometric modeling, not dependent on clicks, not biased towards digital channels, but has been constructed in such a way so that it can be refreshed at a much more rapid cadence with much less outside intervention from analysts. And then that platform allows marketers to sort of get the best of both worlds, where they can experiment, validate that the model is actually working. They don't have to take nearly as much on faith, and it fits much more naturally into the pace at which they're used to working. And so that is, that's the idea behind Recast.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And one of the things that I love, you've said this line a number of times, that you want to rid the world of wasted marketing spend. Where do you see the biggest waste from marketing spend, and what can marketers do to try and spot it and stop it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, every marketing organization is going to have some amount of waste. And I think that is sort of the core of that quote. And there's no getting away from that. And things change. And so you have to be experimenting, you have to be changing. The goal of truly zero waste, I think is impossible. But I think the companies, where is there a lot of waste? It's different for every different company. I think that is one of the more interesting things that I have learned is there are some companies that we work with that, they spend a ton of money on TV and it's all super valuable. And that channel crushes it for them and it's a great investment. And then we work with other companies and they spend a ton of money on TV and it just doesn't work at all. But the CMO is really strong-headed and that's a channel they're committed to. And it's just it's so different. And so it's not certain channels are wastes and certain channels aren't. It really varies depending on the company's approach to thinking about how are we going to operate our marketing program? How are we going to measure it? How are we going to be thoughtful? Do we have a systematic approach to doing measurement, to doing experimentation, to, at least harvesting the signals that are there, or do we not? And so that's really the difference that I see and people often ask me that. CMOs are like, oh, what's the good channel for us? And I'm like, that is not even a reasonable question. That's not how it works. Every channel can be good or can be bad. It depends on your company, your approach to creative, your willingness to operate within the constraints of the channel, your ability to measure, your ability to experiment. Those are the things that really matter, not some it's just TV's good or TV's bad. That's just not how it works.
No, the only time that's a consideration is if you're early enough in getting into it. Well, two different considerations. One, from a positive perspective, if you're early enough to adopt a channel, then pretty much everything that you do in the channel will work. And that's just because if you look at early Facebook, and I was investing in Facebook in 2011, 2012.
Those CPMs, they were miraculous.
They were, what a time to be alive and work in marketing. It was great. And also you look back at targeting and I'm I could probably precision target my best friend with ads. But if you're an early enough adopter of channels, I tell people this with podcast advertising, the early mover advantage has shifted there. But when we were first really monetizing that channel and I came to it in 2016, but a lot of brands went to it in 2014, 2015. You're talking about the whole scale of the medium being in the millions of dollars in terms of investment.
CPMs, I remember this. I tell people this about podcasts, is CPMs were so low. No one even knew how many people were listening.
Hilarious.
Hosts were begging for sponsors. It was crazy.
The price that I paid for Joe Rogan in 2016, 2017, Spotify would never. And obviously shows have scaled a lot since then and all that. But the other part of it that I tell people all the time, especially with channels like television and frankly, most offline channels, but I'd even say the same thing for Meta, certainly for direct mail. It's if you test too narrowly of a cohort and you test too narrowly, I love when people are TV didn't work for us. And it's what'd you do? And it's well, we ran 2 day parts and 3 channels and we ran for 2 weeks and we spent $6. And you're well, okay. Okay. Yeah. Maybe.
And I've heard the other way where they're we hired a big name agency and we did a brand campaign. And it's yeah, of course it didn't. You've never done that before. You don't have the distribution of Gillette. It's not.
Another good one, and I wanted to talk to you about this too, is obviously one of the biggest challenges is knowing whether or not ad spend is actually driving real growth or if you're just shifting dollars around, right? Incrementality is one of those concepts that I hear talked about a lot. But for me, it's that, to your point about television. I look at the old revenue spike that you get from a Black Friday, Cyber Monday, or a Super Bowl ad, right? And when you think about it, were those sales actually incremental? The example I give for Black Friday, Cyber Monday is this past year, I bought all of my skincare for the next 12 months. So that means that those brands are not going to get money from me until the next Black Friday, Cyber Monday. So all you actually did was mitigate your price elasticity and pull sales up.
I mean, anything that's nonlinear is just hard to deal with in general. Like, it's hard to reason about as human beings. Like, human beings tend to reason about things in an additive linear fashion. Anything that's multiplicative or, God forbid, exponential, like, it's just very difficult for us to reason about. And I think really the problem that we're getting at is that, you said people use this word incrementality. It is having a moment. I definitely agree that not everyone is using the word consistently at the very least.
It's like really, when a kid finds a new word and they're like, I'm going to say it all the time. Like, or I think of like Clueless when she's like sporadically. I'm like incrementality. I'm like, we've been talking about that concept for a very long time.
Well, we have, like you and I, Krystina, but I actually think it is new. I am glad to see more people at least thinking about this idea. But I think, when I think about what does incrementality mean, it goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of the podcast. It's causality, right? If we do this thing, what does that cause on the other side? And in the context of marketing, the core problem is that it's just difficult to understand. No one knows what the true causal relationship between your marketing program and your sales is. You can't go look it up somewhere. You can't confirm it. And so all of our different measures of marketing are all ideally, right, they should be approaching causality or approaching incrementality in some way, but it's very difficult to confirm how close or how far away they are. The truth here is unknown and unknowable. That is the phrase that I like to use about incrementality. It's out there, right? Like, there is some incrementality number. We just don't really have access to it. All of the different methods that we have, and whether that's a post-checkout survey or a touch-based attribution or an experiment or a media mix model, they're all hopefully, helping us narrow in on what that true incrementality number is. But fundamentally, it's inaccessible to us. And so a lot of these things we struggle with because there's nothing to compare it to. We're sort of like floating in space with very little to grab onto as marketers about what the truth is. And that is the thing that makes it really challenging.
Yeah. It's a great point. We're still in Q1, but CMOs are planning for next quarter, and next quarter they're going to start planning for 2026. I think the challenge that a lot have, though, is transitioning from like those one-off tests, even when you're kind of like drawing the through line and thinking about like one-off tests for incrementality, right, to more of like a continuous, always-on optimization strategy. That is such a major shift for organizations. How do you recommend marketers and marketing leaders adjust their mindset to make that approach more successful?
It's really hard. And I think a lot of it, it's really hard. So if you're in this seat and it feels hard, you're not alone. I think a lot of the work that needs to happen is around, so first of all, a lot of the change needs to happen at the top, right? You have to have the CFO and the CEO and the marketing leadership especially all bought into this idea. I think newer companies have it a little bit easier because you see experimentation happening in like the digital product team, and like these companies are getting used to the idea of we're going to test and experiment to validate what's working and what's not. And especially like healthy cultures here accept that not every experiment is going to work out. We're going to run this A/B test for this new feature and it's not going to drive conversions even though we spent a month on it, and like no one gets fired, right? Because that's a natural part of building digital products in today's world. I think marketing teams need to get all of leadership to start thinking about their marketing program the same way that product managers think about building a digital product, where we're going to have to run a lot of experiments to get better and be continuously learning. And failed experiments are part of the journey. It has taught us something interesting. We're going to use that information and move on to the next thing. And I think that a lot of, especially sort of marketers from previous generations, they come from this world where it's like, we're going to buy all of our media at upfronts, and then like we're going to make the plan, and then the plan is going to happen, and we'll check in next year. And like, you just really got to move away from that and move into a world that's much more dynamic. And I think some companies have it easier because it's in their DNA to build products this way and to think about their business this way. For other, more traditional, maybe more legacy businesses, you're going to have to do some more education and just try to slowly turn that ship. But I think, pointing to what other companies are doing, showing some wins from some experiments and being able to say like, hey, look, we are learning meaningful things. This is how it is impacting our plan. Those sorts of wins that you can present to a CFO, to a CEO, to the board, those are the things that really can start to help you gain traction to be able to actually start, again, moving that big ship. And you're just going to have to accept that it's maybe going to be a little bit slower than if you're at like Airbnb or something.
Yeah. Big ship, hard to move. Makes sense. I could talk to you for another 3 hours. Certainly won't be the last time we talk about all of these concepts and more. But I always have a final question that I end on. And that is that we hear the term growth hack all of the time in our business. And what I want to know is, what is your favorite growth non-hack?
My favorite growth non-hack. I do a lot of marketing for my business. What we try to do is we just try to create as much value as we can in the world. That is our goal as a marketing team. Put out really good content, be as helpful as we can to as many people as possible. And we just have faith that that's going to work out well for us. And so far it has, and I feel really good about it. We can stand behind everything that we put out in the world. We think it's helpful to people. People tell us it's helpful to them. And the vast majority of the people that we touch are never going to buy our product. That's totally okay with us. And so that is my favorite sort of growth not hack for our business, is like set the bar really high on everything that we produce, try to be as helpful as we possibly can. But I think we're making the world a better place in our own little small way. And that is something that I feel really great about.
I love that. I very much take the same approach and tack to that. Thought leadership can feel kind of navel gazy sometimes. And I very much appreciate the way that you go about it. Actually, if you're not following Michael on LinkedIn, you should. He's a great follow, like just really, really interesting, in-depth exploration of a lot of the different data and marketing concepts that we actually addressed on this interview, but also that you're addressing in kind of your everyday life as a marketer. So I love collaborating. So thank you so much for joining me on the show. And yeah, awesome.
Krystina, thanks for having me. This was a blast.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Growth Talks. We hope you found our discussion insightful and fun. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more valuable content. And if you're excited and ready to start up-leveling your growth strategies and execution, Right Side Up has you covered. Right Side Up is a leading growth marketing agency that is partnered with over 1,000 companies of all stages and sizes to help them meet and exceed their growth goals. With expertise across all growth marketing functions, we can help you evaluate product market fit, develop customer acquisition strategies, navigate executional challenges and staffing gaps, and make pivotal decisions with confidence. And whether you need one individual or a custom-built, full-service team, we'll find you the right A+ talent. Visit us at rightsideup.com to see how we can help you and your company grow.